Today is April 28th, 2026, and we're going to be covering some general updates related to the war in Iran and a few other stories that have taken place over the past week. And the first story, when it comes to Iran, is that the Western media has been reporting that Iran is near its limit in oil storage capacity. Now, this is from the Wall Street Journal. Iran is working to find new ways to store its oil, hoping to avoid a crippling production shutdown. Now, this has been something that the West has been hoping for ever since Donald Trump announced a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz about 2 weeks ago. And we're starting to see more stories accumulate across the media that Iran is near its limit. Some sources are saying that they are about 2 weeks away from having to shut down production because they don't have anywhere to store it, or they don't have a way, again, to move it out of the Strait of Hormuz with the U.S. imposed blockade. Goes on to say, with oil backing up at home, Iran is reviving derelict sites known as junk storage, using improvised containers and trying to ship the crude oil by rail to China. Iran has presented regional mediators with a new offer to stop its attacks in the Strait of Hormuz in exchange for a full end to the war and a lifting of the U.S. blockade on Iranian ports. And we're going to get to that in a second in more detail. Iran did, over the past couple of days, present a proposal to the U.S., which the U.S. has rejected. And they aren't too different than what Iran has wanted in the past, in opening up the strait, lifting of sanctions in exchange for the IRGC removing their blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. I would say, though, just at the start, that these new proposals, are fairly maximal, very similar to the U.S. proposals that they continue to pitch to Iran. They're both maximalist, and perhaps these proposals are actually meant to be nothing burgers, and they have no expectation of the U.S. actually, negotiating on these terms. But we'll see. We'll get into that in a moment. Now, this would see discussions about Iran's nuclear program, these proposals, put off for a while. They would be shelved until these preliminary issues are addressed. And Monday, Trump discussed the proposal with his national security team. Now, 5 cargoes have been observed since the blockade passing through the Strait of Hormuz, bringing the average export of oil from Iran down to about 500,000 barrels a day between the 14th and the 23rd. And of course, with the limited ability to load crude onto shipments, Iran's national oil company has begun reducing output, according to Kepler. And there are a lot of things that happen at oil sites when production is backed up or it has to stop, with the oil still coming out of the ground and that type of thing. Production cuts often start before storage is technically full, because operators need to preserve room in the system and avoid dangerous bottlenecks. Now, oil is up to about 108 a barrel, and this was reported on Monday. And many think that this implosion of Iran's production is going to happen within the next 2 weeks. Now, Trump said on Sunday it'll be about 3 days before their infrastructure started to back up, which, again, even people in the West are reporting that it would be at least 2 weeks. Now, Axios reports a slightly different story, and this is why it's important for me when I look at these many stories being splashed across the Times, the Journal, Financial Times. Many have reported in the Western media. You've had experts on Substack that have also went into some deep dive analysis of where Iran is in their production and its potential of stopping and what the ramifications might be, and that they don't have a lot of time. Now, on the flip side, Axios has reported that Iran has extra storage capacity, and they can get some tankers through the blockade. That's not too dependable, because many of them are being seized even after, far beyond when those tankers have left the Strait of Hormuz. Like last week, there was one that was boarded and detained going towards India. So the state of Iran's oil infrastructure could sway regime strategy as the Strait of Hormuz stalemate creates political pain for the global economy and the U.S. It goes on to say the country may not be in imminent danger of major crude shut-in, and this is according to Anton Halif, and this is the chief analyst with climate and energy data at a firm called Kairos. Half cited that Iran's experience in building stocks during the COVID crisis, available space at other facilities, and efforts to increase alternative storage and export facilities over the past 10 years is likely all prepared Iran. And that's something that sits at the back of my mind as I go through many of these stories, is they've prepared well for this war in Iran. And I wouldn't think that they wouldn't have prepared for this very scenario already. And we probably don't even know what their storage capacity looks like in the country. That we may not even be aware of all of the different resources they can use to head off any kind of shut-in that might take place. Now, Greg Brew of the Eurasia Group challenges estimates that were made in mid-April, and that's what we just went through when the blockade began, that Iran only had about 2 weeks worth of storage space. He said the estimate presumed Iran wouldn't be able to export oil during this time. And he also said that Iran is capable of halting production without a catastrophic loss of pressure in the fields. He also argues that the IRGC has other revenue sources like smuggling oil over land and using smaller tankers. And again, the idea of trying to breach the strait and move oil across land, it comes with its own risks, and it oftentimes gets more expensive, especially for the refineries in China, where most of this oil would be going. It gets expensive for many of those factories and manufacturing facilities to receive the oil in that particular way over land. And then you have to think that there's also a heightened risk of a problem on the logistic trail if you were going to transport oil in this particular way across land and across a couple of borders as well. So he goes on to say, even if the U.S. blockade is completely successful, and of course that's not the case right now, the IRGC would be able to rely on alternatives to keep troops paid and fed, and its position in Iran secure. And I've heard that this could be a month or two before Iran could actually start feeling any pain. And the only people that continue to feel the pain right now are the Europeans, for example. China, it hasn't really hit them too hard just yet. And of course, on a domestic level in the U.S., we are seeing issues when it comes to the economy and inflation. It's planting season, as many of you already know, and the holdup of the fertilizers and urea in the Strait of Hormuz is creating a lot of issues for the farmers on the U.S. side of things during the planting season. And we have to remember that just last year, the farm industry, big ag, it ended up getting a bailout because of the pain that the tariffs, that Trump's tariffs caused them, and also the retaliatory actions that China took in not purchasing soybeans from many of these farmers. So we've already had to reimburse farmers with taxpayer dollars, and they're going to be hurting again because of this fertilizer shortage. And this is going to drive up prices for everyone. And we won't see the consequences in the short term, but they're making their way onto the scene. Now, on Iran's proposal that they've pitched over the past couple of days, this is again from the Journal. They have presented regional mediators with a new offer to stop the attacks in Hormuz in exchange for a full end to the war and lifting of the U.S. blockade of Iranian ports. And the proposal was presented by their foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, over the weekend. It's designed to break the deadlock in the conflict and set talks back in motion. Because as we discussed before, the major sticking point for why the Iranians don't want to go back to the negotiating table right now is because of the U.S. imposed blockade. This is why the meetings last week were canceled. Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner didn't end up going. The Iranians ended up going to Islamabad, where the negotiations were supposed to take place, but they only met with the Pakistani mediators and had discussions with them. They had no intention of meeting with the U.S. side. And J.D. Vance wasn't even heading up the negotiation. So their big sticking point is getting the strait back open before they even sit back at the table. And as we'll see in a moment, way before you start talking about the nuclear program again. So the proposal, of course, was meant to break the deadlock and set the talks back into motion, and it would temporarily freeze talks on the nuclear program. And Arachi on Monday also met with Vladimir Putin to discuss the proposals as well, and Moscow praised the efforts by Iran to get the negotiations back on track. Secretary Rubio on Monday said he believes Iran is serious about making a deal with the U.S., but they won't allow Tehran to control the strait. This is also a major sticking point for Washington as well. And it would seem that President Trump is open to some creative thinking when it comes to the strait. As we talked about a couple of weeks ago, this idea of jointly administering the strait is something that seems to interest him, but I don't know. It hasn't been reported on whether or not that component is part of any talks that have gone on this far. Iran's latest offer envisions a three-stage plan, with the first requiring the U.S. and Israel to end the war and provide guarantees not to start it again. Similar to the Russo-Ukrainian war, they want to address root causes. Now, that's the first piece of this, and already you can sense by the tone that it's pretty broad and maximalist. The U.S. and Israel will never give guarantees like that, and even if by some chance the U.S. capitulated to that idea, this whole process would have to at some point be ratified by Congress, and Iran wants this to be ratified at the UN, which are both basically going to be non-starters. Tehran proposed that mediators would then resolve the closure of the strait and help reach a deal for management of the waterway, the official said. Iranian officials told the mediators that Tehran still aims to have the strait under its control, and only then would it start negotiations on its nuclear program and other issues such as its funding to proxies in the region. So the proxies take the far back end of this process, and before the proxies, the nuclear program couldn't be discussed. Then before that, you're talking about management of the Strait of Hormuz. Before that, opening it, right? Finding a way for both sides to stop any kind of kinetic action from happening in the strait, negotiating management of it with Iran still retaining control, then nuclear, then proxies, and missiles aren't even on the table. And so obviously this is going to be a plan that, as Caroline Levitt said about 2 weeks ago, it's a plan, the first 10-point plan that was proposed, Trump threw it in the trash. This is another one that we're going to see the same situation with. But as I never tire of saying, I think there are backroom negotiations that are happening right now. And we won't know about them until something actually happens or a breakthrough occurs. So elsewhere in the region, Israel and Lebanon have started fighting again despite the ceasefire. And the ceasefire is still formally in place, but the fighting continues, of course, as violence continues in Gaza. The death toll from the IDF campaign in Lebanon reached 2,521 people since March 2nd, an additional 7,804 wounded. And this is according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. Israel's military said one of its soldiers was killed and 5 others wounded, 3 seriously, in a drone strike allegedly perpetuated by Hezbollah on Sunday. And so this is the reason why fighting has resumed. Israel responded to this attack. And so you can see that peace treaty is collapsing fairly quickly. So that's our Iran update. And again, it's been pretty quiet. Uh, there hasn't been too many big hiccups. Trump has been he's been making his usual hyperbolic claims about what he's going to do to Iran if they don't make a deal. They've already made a deal. We've already won. The messaging continues. And basically, the only thing that has drawn the country's attention away from the geopolitical diplomacy that's taking place right now, or not taking place, is the shooting that happened on Saturday at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And I talked briefly about this in a short that I did yesterday. And long story short, you've got an individual that made his way to Washington, D.C. from California, and he got himself a hotel room at the same hotel where the White House Correspondents' Dinner was being held. He checked in with his firearms. He had a pistol, a shotgun, several knives. How he got through, why this hotel didn't have some kind of enhanced security for everyone checking in over the past at least week before the Correspondents' Dinner is a mystery to me. But he was able to check in, and on the night of the dinner, he charged a checkpoint with his guns ablazing, charged the checkpoint, shot a Secret Service or security guard. And this security guard had a bulletproof vest on, so he was okay. And the shooter eventually got taken down. And everyone was at the dinner, the press and the cabinet were safely evacuated. And so we have to be thankful for that, for sure. And it's a big deal when you think about it. This is the third time that something like this has taken place, where an assassin has tried to take out the U.S. president. The first, as we discussed before, was in Butler. The second was at a golf course where Trump was playing golf. And then this is the third. And you have to ask yourself, how? And we'll get into the reasons that we've been hearing over the past couple of days. But the main question shouldn't be about political rhetoric or any of this stuff right now. We've heard it all, and it gets pretty old, honestly. But security, how was any of this possible? After two times, you'd think that the hotel where this was taking place would have been a fortress. Maybe like nobody gets a room for the weekend or something like that. But it should have been a fortress. This shouldn't have even happened. This guy shouldn't have even made it past the front door. And that's truly the conversation that everyone should be considering. But very shortly after the events took place, the conversation shifted to Trump's ballroom. When Trump did his press conference after the events took place, he said, "This is why we need a ballroom." And just like that, all of the MAGA surrogates that are being paid took to social media and started posting basically the same thing, that this is why we need the ballroom, instead of truly thinking about why this was able to happen or allowed to happen a third time. And then after you have a conversation for a day or two about the ballroom, we go right back to arguing with ourselves in this country. America having a conversation with talking to itself, basically, about violent political rhetoric. If you remember last year when Charlie Kirk was assassinated, the same conversation happened. Temperatures need to come down. Temperatures need to come down on both sides. The left is too violent. The right is too violent. You guys did January 6th. Hey, you guys took out Charlie Kirk. The same conversation is happening. No side has the moral high ground. I'll tell you that right now. This kind of rhetoric is just baked in, as I said already, into our political culture at this point. And a lot of people may push back when I say that much of it was introduced by Donald Trump in his first term. It started with Trump, and Granted, it wasn't as bad. Trump's rhetoric and his posts and the way he speaks wasn't as bad in his first term, at least to me. But then when we move into his second term, we start seeing a huge change from not only the way he speaks, talking, celebrating the death of Rob Reiner and these kinds of things, but also how all of his surrogates speak in the MAGA movement, because they're not innocent either. So this change in how we have discussions, political discussions, has gradually come to a point where I just don't think you can turn the temperature down. It's baked in. It's become popular for people to be as outlandish, provocative, vile, and irresponsible with language as they possibly can. It's profitable to do it. It's popular to do it. And it just continues to get worse. When I spoke about a week ago about the comments that Trump made on Truth Social, the picture of him that he put up depicted as Jesus, talking about how he's going to wipe out Iran and their entire civilization, I said specifically at that time that this is not the end. We are going to see the rhetoric continue to get worse, not only from Donald Trump and what he decides he's going to post on any given day, but within the movement. And this goes for the left wing as well. And that's why I say that as we have this conversation with ourselves again, I step back and I start to think to myself, well, you can point the fingers all you want to. You can try to be as self-righteous as you want, stand on a pedestal and point the finger and say, we've got to go after them and we've got to lock them up. We've got to do something because they're creating a lot of violence. The left is doing all this stuff. Like, yeah, actually, it's both sides. The social media is a cesspool. Our elected officials aren't helping with some of the language that they're using. And that's basically what our political culture and economy look like right now. This stuff is baked in. And unfortunately, as I pointed out before, I think that the violence that comes with it is the new normal. Now, let's pray. We have to pray for our country and hope that that's not the case. But I don't see any signs that would indicate that it's going any other way. You know what I mean? And if we were serious about this conversation, let's be honest for a second. If we were serious about addressing these problems, we wouldn't start by saying, well, it's leftists and communists that are carrying out all these problems. And I'm not either one, but I will say that's not the right place to start. Just like whenever we have a mass shooting and the left, the Democrats come out and say, well, it's the firearm that caused it. I would say that's not the right place to start either. I watched a Piers Morgan panel debate yesterday. Jack Posobiec was on there and he was basically blaming tweets and I don't like leftism for this maniac doing what he did. I said, I don't know that that's the right place to start, guys. A tweet, what he reads on social media, maybe that's a part of it. Just like when the left says maybe if this person didn't have access to a firearm, this wouldn't have happened. Like, I think that might be a part of it, but this isn't where we should start in either situation. So just focusing on what happened this weekend, you can think of the discourse and how things have deteriorated and gotten corrosive as part of the problem. But ultimately, it's just it's mental. There are millions of people in this country that have political opinions that I disagree with or that might be on the fringe. And oftentimes they don't do these things. They don't pick up a rifle and try to snipe it at like a Charlie Kirk. They don't do assassinations often. So in one way or another, you can say political ideology has a small part to do with motivating these actions. Larger part is that it's mental. It's not a popular thing to talk about and say, but much of it is mental. It's a spiritual problem. The other part is social media. It's a cesspool. It's garbage. I hear a lot of people on the right wing talk about these major pundits and correspondents on like the legacy media. or comedians that have a huge audience, and they say, well, they need to quit telling jokes that are controversial, that might suggest some kind of violence. It's like, well, I'd say, okay, well, yeah, legacy media has a part of it, but the bigger problem, social media, is much worse. That's where people spend a lot of time. Some crazy people, they may see the legacy media, MSNBC or Fox, once in a while and say, oh, I agree with this. Or I might hear Jimmy Kimmel say a joke. They may say, well, I agree with that joke. It's funny. But then you have to take, you can set that to one corner and say, well, these people that carry out violent acts like this also spend a lot of time digesting social media. And there's crazy shit from social media coming from both sides. The exposure to that is likely at a much higher volume and pace than any of the mainstream talking heads that we may point our fingers at when these incidents happen. So again, you've got a spiritual and a mental issue within our current political climate, social media that perpetuates it, and there's a robust, nuanced conversation to be had about this, but nobody's going to have it, right? Because it's more profitable for people to just point fingers and draw these weird conclusions about the cause. What caused it? We've said before. We've seen everything. We've seen that it's leftists. It's their doctrine. It's what they believe. They're preconditioned on the left to be violent this way and crazy. We've heard that. We've heard people say it's Israel. We've heard people say it's Iran. All these different things. We've heard people say that this was all staged. There are many causes, and many of them have to be seriously explored. This is one of the reasons why I've always been frustrated about the conversation that we have when a mass shooting happens. You have a mass shooting that happens in this country, we only talk about guns. There's a fringe, there's a tiny group of people that say this is like mental. There's something going on. There's something spiritual going on that maybe we can't sit down and put our fingers on it and make headlines talking about it like we could when we talk about limiting guns and the Second Amendment. There's a conversation, a serious one to be had about it, but nobody wants to take it seriously. The pharmaceutical industry, all of these different things, and how they contribute to these mass casualty events or just events like we saw at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And I think that when these conversations when we don't engage in those conversations, that's why people look at these circumstances in a way that I just mentioned. They think it's staged. There's another part of the Piers Morgan panel debate that I saw, and he was asking a couple of the panelists if they thought that the event was staged. He said, this is the craziest part that I've been hearing over the past couple of days, is what Piers said, is that people think this was some kind of setup. And they were all quick to say, no, we don't agree with that. And one of the panelists, it was Mark Lamont Hill, he said, well, your question's very interesting. He said, and then I said, I don't believe it was staged, but Piers jumped on his ass and said, well, what do you mean it's interesting? You believe it was staged or not? And Mark was just taken aback for a minute, and he said to himself, well, I just said I don't think it's staged. I just think it's an interesting question. But it was indicative of just how hard many people, especially in this case, the MAGA people, they want so much to just manage the conversation. And I don't think Piers is not MAGA. I'm just saying this is the thing that happens when the idea of something like this being staged comes up. The question is never asked, what do people mean when they say staged? Right? And I guess it's a conversation that people feel needs to be kept at the proletariat level. It doesn't need to happen in respectable circles or something like that. But given the fact that every time something like this happens, we don't have a serious conversation about anything. As I just mentioned, we talk about the left and violent rhetoric and all these different contributing factors. We leave out several other factors. So that's why I say it's not even serious. when the conversation goes like this repeatedly, every time something like this happens, and then you take that in conjunction with the security failure a third time for the president of the United States, as if it was no big deal, we just kind of toss that to the side. So when all these things are just sort of irresponsibly handled in the larger discourse, there are people that are going to start to say something is not adding up. Well, I don't, they may say, I don't think that this is just a, theater. It could be, who knows? But I don't think it's that, but something isn't adding up. It's 3 times now that this has happened. Why? How? It's the president of the free world. Come on, like, how does this happen? Oh, and by the way, why are we once again, like we were during Charlie Kirk, just talking about like turning the temperature down on rhetoric? The rhetoric has been like this for 11 years. So those are just some thoughts that I had about the shooting. I've gotten so sick of listening to the same narrative every day. The right wing yelling and screaming about the left in their rhetoric, the left doing the same thing with the right. Then who did it? It's a setup. It's Israel. It's leftist Marxists and all these different things. There's a little bit of truth to all of this, but I think that what disgusts me the most is that so many people are taking one element, one side, and not exploring all of the different possibilities that could be driving this phenomenon that we've seen of political violence. The conversation needs to be longer, robust, more sophisticated than Jack Posobiec saying, "Oh, this is a tweet that went out, and he supported this group, so therefore this group is bad, and they're motivating people to commit violence and all this stuff." It's like, it's kind of lazy. It's just lazy thinking. And that's why I said, I know this was long-winded, but this is why I've said this stuff now, that when it comes to how we talk and relate to one another in our political ecosystem and the violence that we're seeing, unfortunately, and again, we can pray that it doesn't get to this point, or that we can move away from it, because I think we're already there. This is baked in now. I don't see it getting any better. And that's all I have to say today. We were going to cover a story about Markwayne Mullen and the idea that he's going to be going soft. His DHS is going to take a softer tone on immigration. And I guess I could cover it very quickly. So this is again from the Journal. It says the new Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullen is facing mounting pressure from conservative groups that fear that the Trump administration is going soft on mass deportations. And we've already talked about this, actually. And they are. It's not that they're not doing deportations, but they're relying, basically, as we'll get into here in a second, they're just relying on people self-deporting for the most part now. This is one of the reasons that DHS hasn't released, deportation numbers for months. They're keeping it secret and that kind of thing. They've allowed the mass deportation agenda to take a backseat because of midterms, and we've covered that in the previous video. Now, a recent cable news appearance, Markwayne expressed a desire to conduct enforcement in a more quiet way. Organizations such as the Mass Deportation Coalition, formed in March and led by Heritage, interpret that approach as potential betrayal of one of the president's core campaign promises. The coalition recently published a lengthy report concluding that the administration has deported 350,000 immigrants in the first year of Trump's presidency. Far fewer than the 650,000 deportation that Trump officials have cited. And this is months after the fact that we're finding this out. Everybody was toting this 650,000. More conservative and realistic people were saying it was closer to 250 to 300,000, and they ended up being right, as per the Heritage Foundation. So it's been a big joke. I said a long time ago that this push was never possible. Now, Mullen has consistently struck a moderate message, saying his goal is to keep DHS from being the lead story on the news each night. The rhetoric reflects guidance given by Mullen by the White House. Many in the White House have backed down mass deportation thing. I even read somewhere that um, we went over this. It was Markwayne Mullen doing an interview on Fox, and they were talking to him about a potential amnesty, and he didn't agree with it, but he did again strike a very open-minded tone when he was discussing it with this host. So and then again in another interview that he did on Fox in April with Laura Ingraham, Mullen said that the nation favors legal immigration, and Ingraham cut him off and said, "We want mass deportations. That's what the American people voted for." And that's the dirty secret. That's what's underneath all of this. You can deport people if you want to, but the legal immigration is also an issue. And Trump has never really said that he would do anything about legal immigration, but he has taken steps to press it back. You know, cutting down on these refugee and asylum programs and that kind of thing. But you could see that Mullen is very dovish if you study his statements over the course of the past few months that he's made on immigration. Mullen responded to Laura Ingraham by citing the cost of taxpayer dollars of arresting and deporting migrants, even though they have like a flush $170 billion budget at DHS, the biggest one that they've been allocated for, I think, ever. So he says that we don't want our taxpayer dollars to go towards any kind of deportations or arresting. He says it would be less expensive if they chose to self-deport in response to government pressure, which is what they want. And Markwayne Mullen, again, he's an Oklahoma senator. He's not even from a border state. He has no border patrol experience, no law enforcement experience, to my knowledge. And so, I mean, I'm not sure. Again, I know that Trump just wanted a pawn there, someone that wouldn't overrule him and press back against anything he had to say. But it's unfortunate. This guy is even softer on immigration than Kristi Noem. He's already starting to make Kristi Noem look like she's hardcore. So he continued to say that we're going to slow down, we're going after the illegals, and we'd love for them to leave on their own. Number of arrests, and you have to wonder what they're going to do with all the money that the taxpayers are investing in them. What are they going to do with that $170 billion? What are they going to do with it? So the number of the arrests fell from their peak at 800 in December to less than 500 a day in March. The council said that the administration appears to be moving toward a more concerted effort to pressure immigrants to voluntarily leave by making it clear that the entire way of the federal government will try to root them out, which really isn't true. If anything, they're getting an opposite sign right now because the administration is looking at keeping agricultural workers in the country, seasonal workers, hospitality workers, all of this on behalf of people like Brooke Rollins, a rhino, if you ever saw one, that heads up the Department of Agriculture. So some anti-immigration groups said they would welcome a broader enforcement approach, including crackdown on employers who hire undocumented workers and prohibiting banks from providing financial services to people who are in the country illegally. And, you know, this is something that I've said over and over again. Nobody is going after the businesses that are employing them, the banking services. They're not trying to touch this from a legislative perspective. You can depend that it may not be as loud as it was under Kristi Noem and Corey Lewandowski. DHS won't be as loud as that and sensational, but they will be just as ineffective at any kind of deportation or immigration reform as Noem and Lewandowski were. They're going to do just enough to satiate the moderate wing, the people in the MAGA coalition that will never leave Trump. They'll do just enough to satiate them. That's all they care about. But the rest of the voters be damned. So that's what I have to say about that. Kind of a slow news week. We'll see about doing another show soon, but that'll do it for me today. And I want to thank you for joining me, and like and subscribe and leave a comment if you so desire. Have a good one.